Right now, an airline CEO is signing a contract for jets he won't see until 2033. The price isn't really negotiable. The delivery date isn't really negotiable. And the supplier, that was decided before he even walked into the room. Two companies control his future, and walking away isn't an option. This isn't a story about weak airlines. This is a story about a $500 billion market that's rigged, and how one company in Brazil is trying to blow it all up. Every airline lives or dies by one aircraft type, not the flagship you see in ads. The workhorse, the 180 to 220 seat jet that flies all day, every day, the one that quietly prints money or quietly bleeds it. These planes run the busiest routes on Earth. They decide which cities get connected. They shape ticket prices. They lock in airline strategy for decades. And for decades, there have only been two real suppliers, Airbus and Boeing. That's it. If you're an airline CEO, that's not an abstract problem. It's personal. Every fleet decision you make locks you in for 20 to 30 years. Training, maintenance, spare parts, pilots, simulators, everything orbits that one choice. And when something goes wrong, you can't switch. If deliveries are late, you wait. If prices rise, you pay. If quality slips, you absorb it. On paper, airlines look powerful. Global brands, massive revenues, millions of passengers. In this market, they're trapped. And the real damage doesn't show up on a price list. It shows up in time. Today, airlines order aircrafts they won't see for 7, 8, sometimes 10 years. That's an eternity in aviation. While they wait, they stretch older planes longer than planned. Maintenance costs climb. Fuel efficiency drops. Reliability suffers. Routes that should exist never launch. Growth plans stall, not because passengers aren't there, but because the planes aren't. Passengers feel all of this in higher fares, more fees and fewer options, even if they never see an order book. Airbus and Boeing build incredible machines. This isn't a cartoon villain story. The problem is what happens when those two companies effectively close the market. In the narrowbody segment, the jets most people actually fly, they don't just compete. Together they control almost everything. In a normal market, that kind of duopoly should trigger brutal price wars and faster delivery promises. Here it doesn't, because airlines don't have a third option. If Airbus is sold out, Boeing doesn't have to rush. If Boeing stumbles, Airbus doesn't have to discount. Prices barely move. Delivery dates slip. And airlines still line up. It's not an obvious monopoly. It's something quieter, harder to fight, a polite monopoly. And the longer it exists, the stronger it gets, and the harder it becomes for anyone new to break in. But while airlines are stuck, one company thousands of miles away starts seeing an opening. In São José dos Campos, Brazil, Embraer built its reputation far from the giants. Smaller jets, shorter routes, regional markets. For decades, they mastered a market Airbus and Boeing didn't care much about. Then, behind closed doors, Embraer's leadership starts asking a dangerous question. What if we go bigger? Not a simple stretch of an existing jet, not a small upgrade, a full move into the narrowbody market, the heart of airline economics. The crown jewel Airbus and Boeing protect at all costs. Everyone in the room understands what that means. This isn't product expansion, it's a bet the company move. Embraer has the engineers, the manufacturing discipline, the trust of airlines. What they don't have is margin for error. Because there's a ghost in every conversation, and its name is Bombardier. Bombardier tried this before. In the early 2010s, the Canadian manufacturer launched the C-Series, a clean-sheet, modern, efficient aircraft aimed directly at the Airbus-Boeing duopoly. On paper, it was everything airlines said they wanted. Lower fuel burn, new materials, a cabin passengers actually liked. Then the bills arrived. Development costs exploded into the billions. Delays piled up. Sales came in slower than expected. And just as Bombardier started landing real orders, Boeing hit back with trade complaints and the threat of enormous tariffs on C-Series jets sold into the United States. Bombardier ran out of runway. In the end, the C-Series survived, but not as Bombardier's plane. Airbus stepped in, took control, rebranded it as the A220, and folded it into the very duopoly it was meant to disrupt. Every Embraer executive knows this story by heart. The C Series is the ghost in the boardroom. Challenge the duopoly and you might end up building their next airplane, not your own. So why would Embraer even consider taking the same risk? Because for the first time in decades, the wall might be cracking. Every revolution needs the right moment. For Embraer, that moment might be now. Boeing is bleeding from multiple wounds, production problems, quality failures, and a debt pile built from years of risky bets outside commercial aviation. The 737 MAX crisis didn't just hurt Boeing's image. It crippled its ability to deliver on time. Airlines know it. Regulators know it. Boeing feels it every day. Airbus has the opposite problem: too much success. Its A320neo backlog is so massive that some airlines are staring at delivery slots well into the 2030s. That's not weakness, but for airlines desperate to grow, it feels like starvation. For the first time in decades, the duopoly has a visible crack in its armor. One giant struggling to execute, the other oversold for years. That rare combination creates something airlines almost never get in this market: leverage. Airlines are frustrated, angry, desperate for capacity, and Embraer can feel that pull. But before anyone designs a new jet, there's one brutal question left: who pays for this revolt? Launching a new narrowbody isn't a product decision. It's a 20-year, double-digit billion-dollar commitment. And Embraer doesn't have that kind of cash sitting in a vault. One option is Brasilia. Embraer is a national champion. With state backing, this doesn't just become an aircraft program. It becomes Brazil versus the aerospace giants of Europe and the United States. If Brasilia funds the project, Brazil gets more than jobs. It gets a say in who jumps the queue the next time airlines are starved for planes. Another option sits thousands of miles away. Sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf, especially Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, have the money and the ambition. Backing Embraer wouldn't just buy them a slice of a jet. It would buy influence over the global aviation supply chain. Because if Riyadh or Abu Dhabi write a check for tens of billions, they don't just own shares. They own leverage over who gets jets first when the next 737 MAX-style crisis hits. But money never arrives alone. If someone finances this program at that scale, whose plane is it really? Brazil's? Embraer's boards? Or Riyadh's and Abu Dhabi's? That fight over control could shape not just the aircraft, but who it ultimately serves. This isn't just project finance, it's geopolitics disguised as an airplane program. And even if Embraer survives that battle, it still faces one final test: convincing airlines to jump. Airlines hate risk. They run on thin margins and massive fixed costs. New aircraft programs almost always mean delays, training headaches, and early glitches. They remember Bombardier. If they stick with Airbus and Boeing, they lock in late deliveries. But with familiar partners, if they sign up early with Embraer, they could be tying their future to an unproven, over-budget program. If Embraer succeeds and they stayed loyal to the duopoly, competitors could be flying cheaper, newer jets while they're stuck with aging aircrafts and higher costs. But if Embraer stumbles and they backed it early, that single decision could drag their balance sheet down for years. Either way, the decision lasts decades. In aviation, that's almost a lifetime. When two companies control almost every jet that moves people around the planet, you feel it. Even if you never see an order book. Higher fares, more fees, fewer routes, less resilience when something goes wrong. A real third player could change that. Faster deliveries, more pricing pressure, a backup when one giant stumbles. It would make the entire system less fragile. Fewer mass cancellations when one manufacturer hits a crisis. Fewer airlines stuck waiting 10 years for capacity they needed yesterday. This isn't just an aviation story. It's a blueprint for what happens when any industry lets two giants control everything, and what it takes to break their grip. So if you were running an airline, what would you do? Would you take the risk and back Embraer? Or would you keep obeying the Airbus Boeing duopoly? Let me know which side you'd bet on. And if you want more stories about the power struggles shaping the skies, subscribe, because this fight is just getting started.